Good day. Back in the 1990s, I really wasn't that much of a console gamer. Rather, I was predominantly a PC gamer, and that was because I had access to a fairly powerful computer, which meant I got to enjoy Doom, Duke, Heretic, Hexen, Dark Forces. In fact, old Duke might be getting a new game with Duke Forever. Although it might prove the death knell for Alien's colonial marines, and if that's the case, Duke will forever earn my undying hatred. But really, out of all of the great FPSs that came out in the 90s, the one I remember most fondly was Rise of the Triad. Now, Rise of the Triad has got to be one of the more obscure games from the early 90s, and I really have no idea as to why. This was one of the most original and creative games of its time. It was not just a ripoff of Wolfenstein or Doom. It came out in 1995, roughly 2 years after Doom, and it used an enhanced variant of the Wolfenstein 3D engine. And when I say enhanced variant, I really mean enhanced. It was developed by the rather uniquely named Developers of Incredible Power. Unfortunately, this was to be their only game, but some of them later went on to work on another, more well-known game. You see, this game was developed by Apogee Software, which would later come to be known as... Let's Rock. That's right. Some of the developers of Rise of the Triad actually went on to work on Duke. And it really shows. So with the background out of the way, let's take a look at the PC masterpiece that is Rise of the Triad. Everything about this game is just creative. It's really quite amazing as to how much effort was put into this game. For starters, you have access to 5 characters, and each have different stats, and actually do differ from one another. One humorous thing here is a character named Ian Paul Freely.
Mr. Peter Ian Staker.
P.I. Staker, yeah. Right, Piss Taker, come on!
Even the difficulty selection screen had a considerable amount of effort put into it, as there are 3 different difficulty descriptors, so to speak, rather than just the one found in Doom and Wolfenstein 3D. You have the enemy will devour me, which part is the trigger, I have pet names for my grenades, and no one shall live. It only gets better. You then have dig my grave now, and on the grave it says, I didn't stand a chance. And then, I think I left the stove on, and my personal favorite, I am a freight train of death. And lastly, they call me the cleaner. This set of descriptors is actually my personal favorite of the lot. The last set is not nearly as cool as the first 2, to say the least. And now one more thing before I get into the game. When you try to quit the game, you get to choose a manner in which to die, and there really are a large number to choose from. You have the firing squad, the guillotine, and several others. Although the one I always choose was drive your car off the cliff, mainly because I always figured that the player character would jump out before it actually went over the cliff. When you do select one, you get a little sound effect at the end. Rise of the Triad, as one can see, is a first-person shooter. However, it does feature a few differences from others at the time. For one, you can look up and down, which wasn't even present in Doom, even though admittedly Doom did come out 2 years earlier, but it did run on a more advanced game engine. You can manually look up and down, but if there are enemies on a higher plane, it will automatically look up and down for you. You have access to 4 weapons total, 3 slug throwers, a single pistol, double pistols, and an MP40. Now initially, this game was supposed to be a sequel to Wolfenstein 3D, but that plan was scrapped, and in the little intro cutscene we learned that the game is supposed to take place 1 year into the future. So, in theory, the game is supposed to take place in 1996. Now, in 1996, MP40s were really quite expensive. In fact, they're even more expensive now. So, here you have a cult that is arming some of their foot soldiers with MP40s. That's a pretty expensive gun to arm your foot soldiers with. Those things have to be $2,000–3,000 a piece. And also, they would be close to 60 years old at that time. Also, the pistols look an awful lot like the P65. In fact, the resemblance is really quite uncanny. It looks almost exactly like the 2D sprite. I mean, look. Really though, if you're going to arm a massive amount of cultists with something, this is probably the gun to do it with, as both in '96 and now, it's fairly cheap and easy to find. And finally, you can carry one special weapon, one of several types of explosive weapons, or a magic weapon. One of the coolest weapons in the game has got to be the awesomely named Excalibat, which is a cross between a lightsaber and a Louisville slugger. In fact, if you look closely, it does say Louisville on it. It's actually a pretty powerful weapon and will gib weak enemy foot soldiers, but it's not really effective against many of the tougher ones, unfortunately. This has got to be one of the first times a lightsaber-like weapon has ever appeared in a first-person shooter. The graphics for Rise of the Triad really do look quite good. Sure, all of the enemies are 2D sprites, but at the time at least, I felt that they actually looked a little bit better than the ones in Doom, and that's mainly because the sprites are digitized actors. So it could be said that they look a little bit more realistic, but it's really just personal preference. One of the great things about Rise of the Triad is the gibs. If you kill an enemy with a rocket launcher, they will explode into a pile of guts. And as you can see running down the screen here, there's different little bits of them as well. You've got an eye, and theoretically you're supposed to be able to see a hand with an upraised middle finger. The concept of gibs would later be seen in other games throughout the 90s and early 2000s. However, today, it's not really seen all that much. Doom 3 barely had any, and what little there was didn't make any sense. If you shoot a zombie with a pistol, he's not just going to disintegrate. And really, outside of Rise of the Triad, most of the other gibs were just sort of like preformed chunks more than anything else. However, Fallout 3 really did a great job with it. Surgically removing a super mutant's head is, somehow, really great fun. The enemies themselves are fairly basic. You have guards armed with pistols and guards armed with machine guns. In fact, some of the machine gun guards just have way too much health. It's just quite amazing how many bullets you have to put into some of these guys. You also have a number of robots you have to fight, surprisingly. Some of the enemies even have tactics on their side. Some will lay on the ground as though dead, and then jump up and shoot you, and if you actually wound one, he will beg for his life. Don't feel too bad about shooting them, as they will just play dead until you turn your back on them, and then they will shoot you. Some of the basic foots will have bazookas, but you can't tell who has one, so you just have to be ready to dodge random rocket fire at any time. Later in the game, the enemies will become progressively harder. Some will even shoot nets at you. To my knowledge, this has got to be one of the first times this was ever seen in an FPS. As you would expect, from a game of this time period, you have to face a boss at the end of each round of stages. And the boss fights are pretty standard, but they can be rather challenging. The save button is definitely your friend. In addition to the main enemies, you also have to contend with various traps here and there. In Doom, you had slime pits and things of that nature, but here you have to contend with spikes coming out of the ground, spikes coming out of the ceiling, pits that try to suck you into the ground, auto turrets, giant moving walls that try and crush you, these spinning blade things that can move at times, and to top it all off, you have to try and avoid these indie crushers. Now, in order to survive all of that, you have access to a great number of power-ups that are every bit as creative as the tricks and traps. Here is dog mode. It's exactly what you would expect. You are a dog, and you go around biting and killing the various foot soldiers. From what I can tell, you don't actually take any more damage than normal, so you don't really have to be any more stealthy. Now, when you think about God mode, what usually comes to mind is just temporary invincibility. Basically, you can't take any damage, and you just use your same weapons as always. Here, it's literal God mode. You actually use the hand of God to smite your foes. One of the things I have never got about games is why food can somehow heal wounds. You get shot in the leg and you eat a piece of chicken and that makes the leg heal? I mean, is that sort of like a Wolverine kind of thing? except you have to have something from the outside. It just doesn't make any sense. Also, what makes it worse is that food is always found in the most unlikely of places. In fact, in beat-em-ups, you can literally beat food out of enemies. I'd like to know how and why a foot soldier would carry around a fully formed meal. Health in this game is regained by eating various bits of food that are scattered around the map. One interesting element is if you shoot near a bowl of priest porridge with an explosive weapon, it will cause it to blink, representing that it's hot, and it will actually give you more health than cold priest porridge would. Like with Doom and Dark Forces, there is a way to play an enhanced version of Rise of the Triad. It's called Windrot. It allows you to jump and have mouse look, and it also allows you to play it in higher screen resolutions. The only problem? Fraps stubbornly refuses to record it. I have no idea as to why, but Fraps, he won't have any of it. I guess I just had to anger the machine god. But that being said, Windrot is probably the best way to play it these days. Awesomely enough, Rise of the Triad has received a homebrew port to the DS. Unfortunately, it's nowhere near as stable as Quake or Quake 2, meaning it crashes a lot. So you really are going to have to save often. Even though it does have a tendency to crash, it doesn't do it often enough to make the game unplayable. The controls are a bit clunky as you have to use the D-pad to move. There is an option to turn on mouse look, but it's really not very good at all. The sounds are also not emulated properly as well, but you can at least hear some of them some of the time. As for the music, there is a way to get it to work, but I have not been able to do so as of yet. Thankfully, the graphics do emulate correctly and everything looks pretty good, and it runs at full speed. However, there does appear to be some sluggishness with strafing. To strafe, you use the left and right shoulder buttons. It could be the emulation, or it could be that my DS is getting a bit antiquated. But all told, this is a pretty good port on the DS and is definitely worth checking out. And that is Rise of the Triad, a quirky little game that I definitely recommend tracking down, as it does provide a great many hours of gameplay that has aged really quite well. So this is General Lotz wishing you good Duke Nukem forever. Good Aliens, Colonial Marines. That thing better get made. Or whatever makes you happy.